And this session now is focusing on marine protected areas, because marine protected areas are one of those ways which we have come up to protect this incredible biodiversity that we have, and also helping to address climate change as well, and pollution. So in a way, it is helping to tackle the three interconnected planetary crises. And the question now is, of course, are these MPAs really meeting their potential to address these interconnected crises? And how are we monitoring them? How is the kind of, the impact of these MPAs? They're often called just, paper parks, because they have this kind of legal, official legal protection, but are they really protecting the biodiversity in those areas? And how can local communities get involved in these MPAs and to increase their potential for impact? This session is a strategy session sponsored by Blancpain, and we are very, very happy to have an amazing panel to talk about some of those opportunities to harness the benefits of MPAs. So I'd like to invite the speakers to join me on stage. So first of all, we have Miguel Albuquerque. He's the president of Madeira. Please join me. We also have Silvia Taraves. She's head of conservation at Fundação Oceano Azul. Please join me. We have Mahesh Pradhan. He's COP-C coordinator at the United Nations Environment Programme. And we have Carla Ellison. She's executive director at the MPA Collaborative Network. And last but not least, Vera Coelho. She's senior director for advocacy in Europe at Oceana. Thank you very much for joining me. So, just to highlight, obviously, please participate in the conversation. We had great engagement yesterday and the day before in terms of, audience participation. So feel free to ask a question. There will be lots of opportunities for Q&A later. And also, please use the Slido. There are great questions coming through as well, slide.do. So please have a look at that and send in your questions. So the way we want to talk about this topic today is really looking at recent developments in MPAs. And of course, here in Portugal, there's incredible momentum with the Salvagens Islands MPA. So that's a great opportunity to talk about it. Also, we want to talk about how we actually kind of assess and validate the value of these MPAs in terms of surveillance and monitoring. And then finally also talking about cooperation, how we can build coalitions and partnerships for marine protection. So I'd like to start with Miguel. I mean, given that the great work that you have done here in Portugal and Madeira, we have heard about the Salvagens Islands, the biggest marine protected area of the North Atlantic. Incredible in terms of full protection. It was established 2021 and covers a territory of, it's now 2,677 square kilometers. Incredible. So why was this such a milestone, and what will be kind of the blue economy impact, in terms of fish populations, tourism? Tell us more about it.
First, good morning to everyone. I have to say that Selvagens, the islands, they are one of, I think, the first reserve in Portugal in '71. But it's that two islands at the time is 97 square kilometers. And during these 15 years, since '76, that the government have a team there of natural guards, and the reserve have a fantastic regeneration. We preserve the biodiversity, and during these 50 years, we measure that all the regeneration that we have in fauna, avifauna, the flora, we have endemic species all in Selvagens in the world. They exist only in that area. And we decide with the cooperation with national institutions that we should take the second step. And the second step is to have the biggest not taken reserve in ocean, because it's the only way that we have to avoid the loss of the biodiversity, and to mitigate the climate change is to have a big area that we can use as a hub for the cooperation, that we can study and to have the knowledge about what's going to happen if we preserve these areas in the ocean. The regeneration of the species, the climate change, the accident in the ocean, all the plastics, like Peter Thompson. Peter Thompson has been there at Selvagens with me, and the job is very important. And the decision that we took at the time didn't have any impact in economy, because The fishing is, in that area, we made the studies, and is less than 2%, the fish that they take there. And even if they have some people that complain about the subject, the new generations have environmental education in the schools. And we have to take the political decisions based in rationalism, not in emotions. You live today in a society that lives all the time with this noise, with emotions, but we have to take the right decisions based in the scientific measures to guarantee the future of mankind. And that area belongs to Madeira and belongs to the country, but is open to the cooperation, scientific cooperation with institutions, because that is for the mankind. It's the future of mankind that we are playing now.
Yeah, really great points, Miguel. And, you mentioned this science-based approach. And of course, there is, when we see the beauty of these areas, there's that emotion, but it's actually based on science, and that, full protection for this area is in a way, like a role model, an example for others. So obviously, Sylvia, you focus on marine conservation initiatives at Fundação Oceano Azul, including, for example, the Blue Azores program also here in Portugal. So could you tell us a bit more about how you are kind of advancing marine conservation in Portugal?
Yes, so Oceano Azul Foundation, when it was created in 2017, it wanted to bring ocean to the spotlight, to the center of the decisions. So one of our main aims is to save what is left, to restore what is lost, and to try to build a new bioeconomy and a new blue-based economy that can be a benefit to all of us. Since the beginning, MPAs have been at the core of our action. And we believe, we agree with President Miguel, we agree that fully protected MPAs are the best tool that we have to save what is left and to value what we have in the ocean. We supported together with other international partners like Natgeo Pristine Seas and also Waite Institute. We work with the governments, namely with the Madeira regional government and also with the Azores regional government in the Blue Azores program. And we believe that everyone has a role to take. For example, governments assume this leadership and can be ambitious and to target these plans to actually deliver what it needs. And we need to speed up and we need to be effective implementing these fully protected areas.
Yeah, you made a great point there in terms of speeding up, because we are 2023, we have this 30 by 30 target, and also Peter Thompson has been talking about that for a while. Now there's this momentum with Selvagens, of course, and the work that you're doing in Blue Azores as well. Mahesh, I mean, you obviously have a different geographical focus, but in terms of the direction of travel, very similar. At COP-C, it's currently kind of finalizing a new marine and coastal ecosystems framework, which includes developing an MPA network for the East Asian seas. So could you tell us a bit more about this project and when it is likely to launch and its impact?
Great. Thanks, Martin. But first and foremost, congrats. I can't believe it's the final day already of the Ocean Summit. But with COP-C, and this brings together 9 countries in the East Asian seas, a difficult and sensitive region, especially with the South China Seas. But nevertheless, the 9 countries, mainly ASEAN, so we have Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and Philippines, plus China and the Republic of Korea. But the regional seas are part of a larger framework. Peter also mentioned about this, where we have 18 regional seas globally. So the active ones, the Barcelona Convention for the Mediterranean, we have the Abidjan for West, so on and so forth. And believe it or not, the regional seas will celebrate 50 years next year. So 2 years after UNEP, so to speak. But with the regional seas and with COP-C, we've been trying, and with governments, as it's always, as you know, with all the COPs or the negotiations, it's a little bit tough. We have a very slow process to bring everyone together. So we've been trying to develop this marine protected areas or a marine coastal ecosystems framework. But we were advised by the countries to hold back a bit till we had the Kunming, Montreal GBF, Global Biodiversity Framework, the 23 targets in place. So we've just recirculated after taking into account the 30 by 30 and the other 23 targets. But again, time is short, and if you're looking at the COP-C region, we have about 2,500 marine protected areas, even though the coverage is from less than 1% to 8% amongst the 9 countries. So it's a huge ask in the 7 years to move ahead. And also it's very complicated because we have different agencies coordinating this process. So it's really complex bringing these parties together. But nevertheless, we're hoping that this will pick up some traction and then we move along.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Mahesh, for highlighting that. I mean, you highlighted the need for speed in a way because we're kind of racing towards 2030 and we need to kind of, get there more quickly than we have. But a great initiative that you have there in your region. You also highlighted the complexity of getting this done, coordination. And that's something that, Carla, that you're an expert in because you, in 2013, you founded the MPA Collaborative Network to assist the state of California in the US kind of stewarding their network of 124 marine protected areas. So this is a great example, actually, of this kind of collaborative designation and management of MPAs that we need. So how did you achieve this level of coordination? How can we replicate that?
It was complicated. I'll agree with what you said. I can just only imagine with that many countries, just knowing how complicated it was in California. I mean, it's a large state. If you think about San Francisco, that's North California. You still have to drive another 7 hours before you get to the border. And it's very diverse. There's rural areas, and then there's LA, where you have just so many people. And it just cannot be managed with one agency alone. There's just too much. And there's a very big concern about having paper parks. If you don't know that you can't go down and take your rod and reel and go fishing, if there's no one there to enforce it, if somebody is poaching, if there's no one there monitoring to make sure they work, then these are just paper parks and they're not going to be effective in the long run. I will tell you, we just had our decadal management review, and they are working.
Great.
We're having more fish, bigger biomass. They're spilling over, so there's not the economic concerns. People are able to fish for fish in between the network of marine protected areas. And a lot of that is due to the outreach and the support of local communities. Because we have 14, and we base our collaboratives on the county level. And we make sure that they're comprehensive. So we bring scientists together with city, county, state, federal agencies, with the researchers, with tribal governments and tribal members, ocean businesses. We bring all those people together to figure out the best way to manage the marine protected areas in their local area. And it takes bringing people out of their silos. It takes communication. But once you get them in the room, they start to see the benefit of working together. And they start learning from each other. And it's been interesting because you have these people that don't necessarily agree. But once they're in the room, they start seeing the value of working together, and they start building a coastal community and start saying, this works for us. These are our marine protected areas. And that's when you know you're really making the impact. For us, we would like to have a video, or we need outreach materials that highlight the tribal presence or indigenous presence in our community, or we need things in multiple languages. So each of our 14 collaboratives have different priorities that are fed by these local communities. And because of this bottom up, we're able to inform the state managers, the top down, and we're able to meet in the middle.
Great.
So I guess I just wanted to say that the bottom up is very, very important, but it needs the top down too. You need the policy, you need the manager to make sure everything's consistent, and then there needs to be a way to meet in the middle and coordinate across.
Yeah, great points there, Carla, in terms of that kind of balance of bottom up and top down, but also you mentioned something very important, which is breaking down those silos and this community spirit in a way. Everyone is in it together in a way. Before there were these silos, and it's really important to break those down. And you've managed that in your context. And Vera, as well, I wanted to ask you about work. I mean, obviously at Oceana, it's the largest international advocacy organization focusing on the ocean. You lead advocacy efforts in Europe, of course. So if you look at European MPA strategies, do you believe the current plans will lead to the necessary change to achieve this 30 by 30? We just talked about the need for speed and the time pressure that we have. So what needs to happen to close that gap?
Yeah, thank you, Martin, and good morning, everyone. Indeed, Oceana has been in Europe for 20 years, and over those 20 years, we've conducted numerous expeditions, we've mapped new habitats, we've collected data, we've shared those data with member states of the European Union, we have contributed to the designation of many areas, and we have found wonderful marine wildlife, biodiversity, habitats that most people don't know we have in Europe. When people think of corals, they think of the tropics, right? But we have incredible biodiversity in our own waters, and we have political commitments to protect it. And we have seen indeed that there was this rush to designate, this idea that you have these political targets that have to be met. Normally, they are met a bit too slowly, but what we also started to realize is that the rush to designate led to the creation of thousands of marine protected areas. As Mahesh was saying, we have currently 27 EU member states. Only in the Natura 2000 network, which is the legal basis for the establishment of most marine protected areas in Europe, we have over 2,000 marine protected areas in those countries. But when we analyzed the actual protection of those areas, we came to the conclusion that it was severely lacking. And to a certain extent, it was due to some factors that Kala also mentioned, lack of monitoring, lack of enforcement. But by and large, it was also simply lack of management. So many of these areas simply do not have a management plan at all. And those that do, those management plans allow destructive activities to happen within the protected area, which is complete nonsense. It really calls into question the whole concept of protection. So in December 2020, Oceana published a report where we analyzed all the marine Natura 2000 areas in Europe, and we found that in 86% of the area, destructive fishing like bottom trawling was allowed. And this is a destructive fishing practice. It drags a heavy gear through the seabed to catch fish, but also anything else in its wake. And to think that such forms of fishing are allowed in protected areas, including those that were designated to protect seabed features, is really nonsensical. So from our perspective, that is now the challenge as we try to meet the 30 by 30 targets. It's on the one hand accelerating designations, making sure that we do protect 30% of our ocean by 2030 at the latest, but also that we do it effectively, that those protections are more than a line on a map, but that actually lead to safeguarding all the beautiful values that we heard also from Miguel and from others.
Yeah, definitely great points. I mean, you mentioned designation is important, but that rush to designate meant that there was maybe a neglect or lack of focus on management, surveillance, monitoring, and so on. And that stat on the 86% of bottom trawling, that's staggering. So there definitely needs to be a change. And in terms of assessing the value of MPAs, we need to look at that surveillance and monitoring that you mentioned. We discussed paper parks. You mentioned that is a big issue. And obviously at Oceana, you have looked at designations and the laws and to make sure that they are effectively implemented and controlled, enforced, and so on. So how can we achieve this greater transparency regarding fishing activities specifically, but also MPA enforcement more broadly?
I think technology can really be a fantastic ally in this regard. We have the technology, we have the tools, we just need to decide to use them. One of the things we are advocating at Oceana is to have mandatory vessel tracking on all fishing vessels. So we have the technology that allows us to do this. It's already required for large-scale vessels. But we can do it even in small-scale vessels. These are very small, rather cheap devices that can be installed in any vessel of any size. And once we have that vessel tracking, that monitoring of the fishing activity, then authorities have the ability to check whether these vessels are infringing on a protected area. In addition to that, we need better cooperation and communication. We had a recent interaction with an EU member state where we talked to the Environment Department and to the Fisheries Department. And the Fisheries Department said they didn't have the information about where the protected areas were. So they knew where the fishing restricted areas were for fishing purposes, for fish management purposes, but they did not know what were the areas that were under protection for environmental or habitat or species protection purposes. So even this basic level of exchange of information and of dialogue among government authorities is still an uphill battle.
That's a really interesting point. And Kala actually wanted to come to you because obviously you have in your in your network of MPAs, you also have that issue as well that you have to tackle in terms of the metrics and measuring. But
Well, she had a great point. It's, the coordination among agencies is huge. Our concern is because there are so many enforcement agencies that are on the coast that somebody, would walk by and it would, walk by somebody in a uniform, an enforcement officer that had no idea where there was a marine protected area, which is kind of implied that it's okay then. So what we do is we go county by county and we hold enforcement trainings for all the different agencies. So we bring in the city policemen, lifeguards, National Park Service rangers, state parks, and we train them where the marine protected areas are, what the regulations are, where the boundaries are. Now we have that exponential impact. Instead of just having 1 to 2 wildlife officers that are covering a huge area, now we've got, hundreds and thousands of officers that are able to assist. But even that isn't enough. The monitoring is huge. We work with M2 radar that is able to track vessels as well, because we were having issues with prosecution. So even if we do catch poachers and they're cited, the cases were being dismissed. So then we had to figure out how to have the evidence, how to have it, here's the radar that shows them fishing in this marine protected area, and then do education to the district attorneys and prosecutors and judges that these are important areas and not just to dismiss the cases. So there's a lot that goes into making sure people know about them and that they're being enforced effectively.
Yeah, great points around that, the training, the awareness, but also the education more broadly in terms of that these are protected areas, but also using the radar, using kind of technology that you mentioned as well. So it's a combination of training, education, technology. So Mahesh, I also wanted to ask you about your main challenges when kind of coordinating this kind of implementation of these regional plans, and also how best to kind of monitor success and to achieve that impact we need.
Yeah, I couldn't agree a bit more with what both Vera and Carla mentioned. This paper park syndrome, the lack of capacity, it's a huge reality that's facing us. It's not only the numbers, the percentage. I think the quality of the parks is equally, or if not more important. So for this, I think we are trying to look at different means of intervention, whether it's like technical, communication, but also financing. And this is something I'd really like to learn from the other speakers as to what are some good financing models for these MPAs. I think this is something that's a little bit, it's challenging, especially because there are many different actors involved from the local to the national, federal, etc. And in the case of COPSI, for us, because we are international, we're 9 countries, we're looking also at networks, something like what Carla mentioned, but across borders, which is even more complicated. So we have ecological networks. This is transboundary between, for example, the Coral Reef Triangle. We have a number of countries there. But then we're also looking at social networks where the managers of the MPAs get together for learning, sharing experience. I think this is also something that's worked, as well as management networks where you share across. So different models at different stages, but we're hoping that within the larger sustainable blue economy discussions, we also have MPAs, habitats, everything is consolidated.
Definitely. Yeah, and this power of those networks, you mentioned the different dimensions of that, the management, also those social networks, creating that community spirit in a way we are all in it together. Sylvia, also in terms of the kind of experience and best practice that you have in terms of, obviously valuing natural capital is a key theme at this summit, but also how do we ensure that we actually validate and value those MPAs correctly in terms of monitoring and so on. So what can be the role of surveillance and monitoring to increase transparency in your experience?
It's absolutely crucial to equip the MPAs with the tools that make them effectively work. That's why we talk about effective, fully protected, marine protected areas. So, for example, selvagens are one of the examples where we know that by removing the extractive industries, the life was restored. And so we have these few examples where we know that marine protection works. What we need is somehow to scale up. And if we want to attain the 30 by 2030 target, we need to do it right, not just quick, but also right. For example, Vera was talking about the lack of management and the problems on the legal frameworks and all of that, and that's a reality. It's not enough that we create these paper parks. We need to. We cannot have fully protected MPAs if you don't have fully funded MPAs that can be sustained through time. And this links with a lot of issues that were discussed during this conference in the Blue Finance panels and all of that. Another thing that we believe that is lacking is that ambition. So we have these examples where we know that this marine protection works, but there's a lack of national plans and to somehow scale this up with integrated approaches like the one that is being held in California with the MPA collaborative network. So we need to bring these examples and also, for example, the Blue Azores program, where we are working with the Azores regional government and in partnership with Waite Institutes. And we are trying to establish 30% of marine protected areas by the end of this year to 2023. So we need targets, but not only for 2030, we need targets for 2023, 2024, 2025, and we need to have plans if things are not being held how they were supposed to be, because we need to be effective.
Yeah. Really great points about that ambition and having that 2030 target, and then we get closer and closer, and then we are not meeting it, but having kind of clearer targets year by year makes sense. And you also said something really important, which is that it's not just about speed, it's about getting it right. And you mentioned quality is so important. And of course we want to get to scale, but we can only get to scale if it's really with quality, and that ambition is really important to keep in mind. And obviously, Miguel, you have this experience now having a fully protected MPA in selvagens, and you heard of some of the issues that that we face in terms of monitoring, surveillance, making sure that there is really that protection, that isn't just a paper park. So can you tell us a bit more about how you tackle those issues in selvagens, and how will you monitor kind of progress of the
I'm
MPA?
going to give an example. For me, the question of the protected areas, we have to be realist. It's a political issue, because if you have an area that is full protect, you need the state and the authority of the state, of the political power, to manage, to have the police or an authority that can preserve that area. What's happened in selvagens in 2015, when I have some conclusions from our guards that some of the areas of selvagens have clandestine fishing. At the time, the guards that I had at the islands, they don't have the authority to avoid the clandestine fishing. So I bring the issue to the Council of the State. And it's one of the first subjects that I brought to the Council of the State. And the decision that the Portuguese state took at that time is that we're going to have a police, maritime police, the authority of the state there. And 2 years after, we have now every day, 24 hours a day, the police there, maritime police, because they have the power to avoid the clandestine fishing. And it's because of that we need to convince the political powers that this subject of the preserved areas is crucial for the future. And the political power have to take the decisions. To control the areas, like Vera said, I think that we have two important, the tools that we have today. The technology is fantastic. And it's something that we can use. For example, today, all this biggest area, 2,677 square kilometers, is a huge area.
Yeah.
We can monitorize with technology, we do it with drones. So we have all the radar. So we have the technology to control these areas. What we need is the support of the political power. That's the main issue, because all these associations and foundations, scientific, and everyone that want to preserve, and the society want to preserve these areas, because this fantastic regeneration that we can observe every day in these areas, we need the support of the political power. What is the difficult? Sometimes to take decisions that are not popular, that don't give votes to the political power, it's complicated. But we have other support in this. It's the education. The young generations have environmental education. So they have a clear idea what is important in this area. And I think that is something that we have to be optimistic about.
Yeah, definitely. And you made a great point there in terms of having that political buy-in, the political support. But we have the tools. You mentioned, the technology, the drones, the radar, and the police enforcement as well. In terms of timing, we have a bit of time left for questions. So I'd like to invite the audience to raise their hand. There's a question there, for example, and over there. Please state your name and affiliation, please.
Hi, my name is Akash. I'm from Canada's Ocean Frontier Institute. And I apologize if this is going to be a very naive question. But just from hearing, and this question is for the panel overall, but it sounds like the strategy that's been followed, like to create enforcement, is through combination of carrots and sticks approach. Like, you're creating awareness about stuff that's not happening and that needs to be happening. You're doing training and communication. But my question is, ultimately, who's accountable for ensuring they're meeting these targets? Because with accountability comes responsibility. And when you have responsibility, comes action. And so it almost seems like it's an outside-in approach, trying to have jurisdictions that have made these commitments to comply. But the other approach is, if they made those commitments, they are ultimately accountable, and they should be taking the right actions, including the legal aspects and all so on.
Yeah.
So my question is, who's ultimately accountable?
Yeah, great question. Thanks a lot. Who'd like to tackle that one? Yeah, Farah.
I can give it a go. I think it's a very good point. Accountability lies with the decision makers. So all the political targets that have been adopted, all the commitments to protect our ocean, the responsibility and accountability for those decisions lie with those that have taken them, and they have taken them on behalf of all of us, right? We have these global commitments to protect our planet. The problem is that adopting the targets is the easy part, right? And issuing the press release, congratulations, we've now agreed to protect 30% of the ocean. That's difficult enough, but that's more or less easily done. The problem is then when you need to create the radical change that Peter Thompson was talking about at the beginning of this session, and indeed address those that somehow benefited from the destruction of the ocean or contributed to it. So when the rubber hits the road is when you have to actually address fishing interests oil and gas, who are still trying to expand, including into protected areas or near them, petrochemicals, all sorts of economic interests that are not committed, not engaged, do not feel accountable for those decisions, and fight against the radical change that is necessary. I think it behoves then governments, the political power, to make those choices and to provide, as you also mentioned, the carrots, the incentives. Right now, we are still subsidizing harmful fishing to the tune of billions of dollars every year. Last year, after over 20 years, the WTO finally adopted a partial agreement to tackle some of those subsidies. What could we do with 20 billion annually to protect our ocean?
Yeah.
It's really a matter of political choice.
Yeah.
The financing question that Mahesh brought up, how do we finance the protection of our natural environment, of our planet, of the ocean that we all depend upon? Well, we have some resources out there, and we're really just misusing them.
Exactly. Yeah, and creating those incentives is vital. Yes, Kara?
I was just going to add too, the carrot's really important. And when you want to engage other agencies to take responsibility for helping with the management, even if it's not their mandate, it's understanding how they benefit from it as well and how it aligns with their mission statement, often with state and federal parks and national parks, that it aligns with their mission to protect natural resources. And also the carrot too with fishing industries, that having protected areas that then make more fish is going to help their bottom line as well. And just having them realize that they have a vested interest in the success of marine protected areas, it gets them more involved. It gets them to actually have in-kind support, which helps with the financing. Because it's going to take a lot of money to make sure that these marine protected areas are managed effectively. If we don't have that money, can we use existing resources? Can we leverage each other? And a lot of that takes explaining that it is of benefit to everyone, and of specific agencies and communities and organizations and businesses to be involved.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean, you mentioned something that's important, is that everyone in a way benefits. It's natural capital, but also the restoration and recovery of fish stock is something that even those fishing companies benefit from eventually. Any additional questions? There's a question here, the front. There's a question there. Yes, there's a question there. Yeah.
Thank you. So James Lord with Plymouth Marine Laboratory. I have a comment and a question. So the comment is that marine protected area networks need to be designed with climate change in mind to make sure that they're still fit for purpose in 50 years' time. And scientific institutes such as us can model and predict the impacts of climate change on marine ecosystems. So my question is, what initiatives exist to make marine protected areas climate smart? And how can institutes such as us support those initiatives?
Great. Time smart. Yeah.
I think that we have the science, and we need to integrate the science of climate change on designing the MPAs. For example, in Blue Azores, we are already working with people that are assessing what are the best refugia for the climate scenarios and integrating that into the design of the MPA network. That is something that must be taken into account, definitely.
I think once more, I think it's a political subject too. Because the main point is if the institutions of the government put in their priorities these subjects. Because what's happened till now in the majority of the government in Europe, they put that the goals, but in the practice, it's in the paper. So we need a step from the institutions, from the governments, democratic governments, to take this achievement in a serious practice. As I said, it's not easy because you have a lot of interest, but we're speaking about if you explain to the people, you have to explain to the people. For example, when we protect some areas like selvagens. If you dive in selvagens, like I did, and Peter Thompson did with me, it's a pristine sea. It's like to come in the beginning of the world. So the regeneration of the ocean is very quickly. It's amazing. One of the lessons that we had with these 50 years, that the regeneration is very, very quickly. So if you explain to the people, especially to the normal people, that the regeneration is something that is happen and is good for them. For example, we have some mollusk in Madeira that the people take, it's called lapa.
Limpets.
Limpets, yes, that's the name. So now we protect for 5 months. And that is very important for the people that live from that business. They take in the rocks, and after they sell to the restaurants. When we protect 5 months, the regeneration is so big that all the people know, the people that professional said to me, it's better, President, that if you take 1 more month, 6 months, because it's better for us, because the regeneration is more quick and we preserve our business. So if you explain to the people, this is important to preserve the business, but special our lives in the future, the people is going to understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it puts it into perspective and makes it very practical. We have I think time for one question. There was a question in the front as well. In the front, yes, I think here.
Thank you. Hi, Diane Essam from Mare Madeira. Miguel, thank you for sharing your challenges to get the public and political support to extend the Selvagens Reserve. I'm wondering to get your personal perspective on the likelihood of achieving the 30 by 30 goal, just considering that Portugal and Madeira, they're being leaders in reaching this goal, and yet the Selvagens Reserve, the largest fully protected reserve in Europe, is still, if I did my calculations right, less than 1% of the EEZ around Madeira. So we've got 7 years to increase that to 30% and across Portugal and then across the world. How likely do you think that is?
That's a good question. I'm going to answer with something perhaps you don't know. In Madeira, we take 2 very difficult decisions, more difficult than to take the decisions of Selvagens. We decide to protect 2 coastal areas. One is Cabo Girão. And Cabo Girão, it's an area that is very often visited by the tourism. And we take a decision to take a fully integrated reserve of the sea and the coast, the beach in the coast, and the mountain. And that is something that could have impact in the people that that used to go there to fish, that used to go there to make the activities. But actually, what we receive from the public opinion, it's very positive. The people are happy that they can sell something that they say, this is protected, this is a reserve, and that is very attractive for the people. So so what we should use that, because if you live in a society that the marketing is very important, you know that. When you're going to buy a trousers or perfume, you have to make attractive the subject of the protected areas. The protected areas is something that you're going to if you dive here, you're going to live an experience that is the beginning of the world, like it was in the pristine. If you come here, this is like it was. Here you can watch the regeneration of this plant or this bird. So we have to sell this idea of regeneration as a positive thing and a very attractive thing. I think that's what happens in Selvagens, that everyone wants to go to Selvagens. Of course, we are open only to scientific tourism. But that is something that is important. And after, if you bring the universities, prestigious institutions to make the studies, that is very attractive too. So we we don't have to have that idea, poor ones, we're going to die, because now we have to work for this. And this is very important for the country or for the region. This is civilization. This is to be in the modern times with the intelligent way of have a government and the society lives. So we have to change this idea, we are poor ones, not poor ones. We are doing this, and this is very proud for the people that live in this area.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks a lot. I mean, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but that was a very passionate example of why this works, because it's about highlighting the benefits of that regeneration. Thank you so much to the panel. We've heard how there is the need to kind of go beyond kind of those paper parks, and the way we do that is by highlighting the need for time, speed, but also scale. And obviously, there's the need to, have that proper enforcement. We have the tools. We know from Savagens it can work. We have the technology. We have the police enforcement. But what we need is that political buy-in, that political will as well. The training, the education, the community involvement, all of these things, we know what works. And now we just need to replicate the great work that you've done here. Thank you so much for the panel, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you.